because I'm really honest about it. It's like, well, I'm God. And I don't mean that. I always like to clarify. I don't mean that in the exclusive sense. I'm not saying come to my church and worship at me, but that's all and everything that everyone is. This is huge. That, I mean, I can't put it any more directly that encountering yourself as God, there is nothing that exists within reality that is more monumental than that.
What is another, basically? What is another person if we're the
Yeah.
same being, you know? Like the same mountaintop but different paths, or is 5-MeO somewhere taking you somewhere completely different? And is it even possible to get to those same realizations through yoga and meditation?
I don't care how many non-dual awakening experiences you've had. If you're not integrating that and landing that in an embodied way within your being, then all you're doing is chasing after experiences. You have to be completely committed to truth. And if you're not, then you're not going to make it. When you say to someone, and you really mean it, when you say, I love you, that's a statement that's coming directly from your heart. And that's an energy that you feel with certainty. And you feel it all through your being. Sooner or later, I am going to need to accept that she's going to die. And you can probably tell I'm tearing up a little bit just thinking about it because I love her so much. I would encourage people to love themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, like really, really, really love yourself. And I think that's the most fundamental block for most people.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Lion's Heart. And today I have the honor of having our first ever guest, Martin Ball, PhD, on the show. Martin has immense experience in the field of non-dual awakening and specifically using psychedelics to attain non-dual awakening. He's spoken at many conferences, he's written many books on the topic, and he's worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of people one-on-one with this non-dual awakening therapy. Um, Martin is a man of many different roles. He's a professor, he's an author, he's a podcaster, he's a musician, a father, and a psychedelic integration coach, along with many other things, I'm sure. So, with that, I will go ahead and pass the mic over to Martin and ask the question, who is Martin Ball? And what is your background in non-dual awakening and enlightenment and awakening work?
All right, well, I'll start with the non-dual answer. Um, I'm a localized version of the universal consciousness and being that is associated with a personality construct that is known as Martin, that is associated with this particular human vehicle. And so that's what I am at that level. And then the individuated human being that I am, which is also known as Martin, you listed off a lot of the things that I do. I would add photographer. That's the one major thing that I would say you left out from the list. Um, I've been working on, I guess I've been teaching about entheogens and non-duality for about the past 17 years now, because that's when I came into my own non-dual awakening and transformation. And so these days, if I would just use a shorthand for like when people ask like, well, what do you do? I say I'm a non-dual entheogenic educator. And then I use these different modalities and different platforms to educate. And that includes actively teaching, actively writing, um, and of course, hosting my podcast, which, as a podcast, you bring on guests with different views and different backgrounds. I try and be a gracious host. Honestly, most of the people that I have on my show will espouse beliefs and views that I myself do not hold. I usually let them say that. I'm not into like being the non-dual police or anything like that, and like to allow people to come onto my show to share their view, share their experience. But sometimes when people get into certain areas, I might just redirect with my questions and to something else because like I said, I don't want to be getting into arguments or trying to correct people based on my own particular view. But yeah, I've been hosting the Entheogenic Evolution podcast for 17 years. I've been self-publishing my books for a little bit longer than that. And I'd also add that with the books that I write, I have written 6 novels, so I do also try and communicate a lot of these ideas through story form. That I'm a big fan of science fiction and fantasy works and epics and things like that, and enjoy stories very much, and also enjoy helping people to get beyond the story into just the unfiltered nature of being and reality. So that's kind of me in just a nutshell. Most of what I do is right here. I don't know, does your show offer video or is it just audio?
This is video as well. Yep.
Okay, so then like anybody who's seen any videos of me over the past 5 years, they've probably seen this space right here. This is where I do most of my work. You can see I've got some of my instruments behind me there, and I record on the computer. I write my books here. I process my photography here. I do my digital art here. I do my podcast here. I do my video integration calls with my clients here. I teach my online classes with Mindscape Psychedelic Institute right here. So this is where I am like most of the time. And when I'm not here, I'm usually out somewhere with my son doing some bird and nature photography or going herping, as he calls it, looking for snakes and lizards and amphibians, or taking him fishing, which is a pretty big passion that he has. And yeah. And then my dog, Moxie, she's over there on the couch. She is my shadow and companion. She's been with me for about almost 17 years now. She's been with me for quite
Wow.
a while. So she's an old dog. She's not quite that old. I'm overestimating her age, but she's around a lot. Every once in a while in an interview, she'll start barking. There's a lovely undeveloped lot behind my house right here. So we get bear and deer and wild turkeys. And so we might get to enjoy her barking because she'll see them and she just goes crazy barking over there. But I always talk about her a lot, when people are asking me about non-duality and the nature of the ego, that I like to make comparisons between humans and my dog. So she gets in there a lot, and she's even a character in one of my novels. So I just mentioned Moxie because she's with me right now. You can't see her, but she's just over there snoozing because she's an old girl. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. Happy to expand on any of it as you might like.
Awesome. Yeah, I've definitely heard. Is it Moxie?
Hmm.
I've definitely heard her in an interview before, and
Yeah.
she's got a great bark. But yeah, so one of the things actually that I really love about you is well, it's two things really. One is your authenticity. I feel like from the moment I saw you on a podcast, I was like, this guy is super authentic. I didn't feel, I felt like you were just very comfortable in your skin. You were just, speaking your truth, and I thought that was really, really cool and inspiring. And another thing is how you write about God realization, how you write about awakening and the universe and reality. In Entheogenic Liberation, I really was getting like a lot of insights and transmissions from, just reading that in a cafe and then looking around and seeing people walking around and being like, oh, this is the one being in action in different forms. And
Yeah.
you really, really came through in that book in your transmission there. So I guess my burning question that I just want to, dive right into is what is reality? What is spiritual awakening? What is enlightenment? What do these words mean?
Okay, those are good questions. Well, I'll start with going back to that authenticity bit that you mentioned there. Um, so all of what I have to share about when it comes to the nature of being, nature of reality, nature of God, nature of consciousness, all of those things, I like to say it's all ultimately it's just a self-description in the sense that I am not a believer or follower of any particular spiritual or religious philosophy or view or culture, that all of my views come directly out of my own personal experience, and not just experience itself, but the embodiment process and transformation that I went through. And it was it was an intense process, but it did land at what I like to call the point of completion, where it just became, okay, I accept that this is what I am. I accept that this is what the nature of reality is. So when I speak about these topics, I do speak very authentically and very authoritatively. I don't hem and haw. I don't say, well, maybe this or maybe that. And I used to be that way. So I like to point out that my old egoic configuration, I got my PhD in religious studies. I was very interested in studying all these different mystical traditions and all of this kind of stuff with the question of like, well, what really is the nature of being? What is the nature of reality? And has anybody figured it out yet? And if so, how'd they figure it out? And then can I get a glimpse? And then having gone through my own process, really landed in this perspective of, oh, I think this is what's going on. And I think that this is what it is. And I think that this is what I am. And so when I speak at that level, I'm actually not speaking as Martin. I'm not talking about Martin. I'm talking about the universal nature of the self. And that's where my sense of authenticity comes from, is from this deeply ingrained energetic process that I went through that brought me into this. And I always like to distinguish, it's not just about realizations, because realizations happen along the way. But it's when the quote unquote realizations, when they are deeply embodied as your sense of presence and as your sense of self, that's when you've landed in what I would define as liberation. And so I always like to distinguish between enlightenment experiences or liberating experiences versus I like to refer to it as the energetic recalibration and embodiment process, where you really come into, this is who and what I am. And I'm not talking about what I believe. In the same sense that I like to use this comparison, that when you say to someone, and you really mean it, when you say, I love you, that's a statement that's coming directly from your heart. And that's an energy that you feel with certainty. And you feel it all through your being. You can say, I love you. And I really mean it. And then somebody might ask, like, well, how do you know that you love me? And the answer ultimately is, because that's what I feel. That's what I experience, that I can't not know it. It's the way that things are. And I know it because it comes from the center of myself. And so as I say it and embody it to you, that is reality. So that's where I'm speaking from. And it's a little bit hard for people to take sometimes, that it can, for people who are uncomfortable in themselves, it will be perceived as arrogance. And that's also something that I've let go. It's like, I don't really care how it's perceived. It's not my problem whether somebody thinks like, oh, who does Martin Ball think he is? Because I'm really honest about it. It's like, well, I'm God. And I don't mean that. I always like to clarify. I don't mean that in the exclusive sense. I'm not saying come to my church and worship at me, but that's all and everything that everyone is. And I'm just saying it from a place of deep knowing and confidence. So anyway, that's the preface. Um, so let's get into, you had mentioned like spiritual awakening. So I tend to steer away from the term spiritual, which is fine. I mean, this is just language. These are just words that we're using to kind of parcel out what is the nature of reality? What is this bit? What's that bit? But I do like to say, and this is part of my own process and my own realization and transformation, was that one of the positions that I came to is that what we call spiritual awakening or transformation or liberation or enlightenment, I wanted to redefine it and say it's actually not a spiritual issue in the sense that most people would think about that. So I've studied a lot of Buddhism. So for example, Buddhism, you want to reach enlightenment. What are you going to do? Well, first, you need to study the Buddha Dharma. You need to study the Four Noble Truths. And then you need to be practicing right meditation, right morality, right thought, right speech. And that's part of the Eightfold Path. And those are all great. There's nothing wrong with any of that. And then you also need to detach from your desires. And then the idea is that eventually, if you practice this moral lifestyle, which in Buddhism is defined as moral ethical behavior, that you will free yourself from your karma, and that will eventually stop the process of reincarnation, and then you will become enlightened. You will reach nirvana. And then once you reach your nirvana, you will no longer accumulate karma for the remainder of your life. And then when you die, at that point, you will reach parinirvana, and you will not be incarnated again, and you will be reabsorbed back into the infinite. And that's defined differently in different Buddhist traditions. So that's a spiritual approach to what is awakening, what is it to be spiritual. But in redefining it, the conclusion that I came to is that the ego, which I define as, first of all, it's the individuated sense of self, which is totally valid. You, Timur, you are wherever you are in the world. I don't know where you're looking. Where are you located?
I'm actually in Brazil right now.
Okay, so you're all the way in Brazil in the southern hemisphere. I'm
Mhm.
all the way up in Ashland, Oregon in the northern hemisphere. And we are very clearly two different people. And we very clearly have two different senses of self-awareness because when you look around, you say, yeah, I'm in Brazil. And when I look around, I say, yeah, I'm in Oregon. So the individuated sense of self is 100% valid. It's accurate. And it would be a mistake to say, whoa, it's just an illusion. It's like, no, you're in Brazil. I'm in Oregon. These things are different. Um, but those perspectives themselves, they're shaped and formed by collections of patterns of energy, which with we have identified over the course of our lifetimes. And these patterns of energy shape the ways that we think, the ways that we act, the ways that we choose to express ourselves, the ways that we embody ourselves, the gestures we make, our tone of voice, the words that we decide to use or not use. And then internally, psychologically, we're always dividing things into I like this, I don't like that, I want this, I don't want that, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, I believe this, I don't believe that. So we're always parceling things out. And these energies then define and influence how we go about the world and how we experience ourselves as unique individuals. And because we are human beings, we have the capacity to be self aware of these. And so we have a sense of self, and that is what the ego is. But the ego, again, is just this collection of patterns of energy. Now, we can take that pattern, we can take those patterns of energy and we can put it through a spiritual process like we do with Buddhism. Follow the
Mhm.
Eightfold Path. And what we're doing is we're reconfiguring those patterns and then hopefully at some point reaching a point where we can suppress them enough that we can become aware of the undivided nature of consciousness and the undivided nature of being.
Mhm.
And that's a very long, slow process. And it does tend to make, quote, better human beings through that process because people learn about basic compassion and respect and love and kindness and all these good things that come with Buddhism. But then we also get a lot of metaphysics about, well, there's this karma stuff and there's this reincarnation of this stream of consciousness. It happens over multiple lifetimes. And honestly, that's where Buddhism loses me. It's like, I don't
Mhm.
agree with any of that
Mhm.
because we're all just God masquerading as human beings, right? There's no stream of consciousness, in my opinion, that's moving from one life to the next, and that karma is not a real metaphysical thing. It's
Mhm.
just a concept. But
Can
anyway,
I
back to my position.
can I
Oh
ask a
yeah, you
quick
have a
que-
question.
I have a huge question there that I had in my notes, so this is awesome.
Yeah,
But about reincarnation, I know that I believe in entheogenic liberation. You mentioned that you don't believe in reincarnation or
yeah,
like it's not a thing. So I was really curious about that because non-duality is like your everything, right? Your God experiencing itself in different forms. So then how would it not be the case that God moved through each life? Like, will I, as consciousness or awareness, not experience being Martin or anyone else or a bird outside or these things? Does that make sense? Like, that's where I get kind of
yeah,
because it seems like this being is experiencing itself through everything. So is it like how would that work? Um, yeah.
yeah. No, totally legitimate question. And please feel free to raise your hand and stop me at any point. Like I mentioned as we were emailing back and forth, it's like, I'm a talker.
I
So
love that. I
just
love that. Yeah.
beware. You ask me a question, I'm going to give you a long, detailed answer.
No, I love that.
Um,
Yeah.
so what I like to say is the only one who reincarnates is God. And God inhabits all vehicles simultaneously. So you and I, we are both vehicles for this consciousness to get around reality and explore and experience ourselves with. Another
Mhm.
one is right over there on the couch. It's my dog. Most of the objects of reality, they don't really count as vehicles because they don't go anywhere and they don't do anything and they don't have awareness at the same level that we biological beings do. So this one universal being, so for example, right now, every human being on the planet is God incarnated in human form. And when one of those vehicles dies, that consciousness that is everyone and everything didn't go anywhere. It's still here. And every baby that is born, that consciousness is animating that baby. So I like to refer to God as the all being. It is busy being all beings in all places and all times and exploring all possibilities that are open to it simultaneously. So there's within, say, Buddhism and Hinduism and other religions that come from India as well, it's not exclusive to these two. There is the notion that there is something that has been individuated that crosses from one life to the next, and it's a linear process. So in Hinduism, it is called the Atman. It is the soul. And this soul inhabits this body, and then that body does certain things and develops karma. And then that karma will then influence the next iteration of that soul in a different body in the next life. Now, Buddhism comes along, and Buddha, this is where I agree with Buddha. That Buddha said, I can't find souls anywhere. I don't think they exist. So Buddha introduced the concept of anatman or anatta, where in Sanskrit, if you put an a or an an in front of something that means not that, like we use the word agnostic means I don't know. So linguistically, that we have the same roots there. But then Buddhism kind of has a problem because it says, well, there's no souls. So then the question is, well, if there's no souls, then what reincarnates from one life to the next? And the answer that I think is very, very vague and nebulous in Buddhism is it's a stream of consciousness. And that stream of consciousness then moves from one life to the next. But it's still parceled out as an individuated process. And so that you as an individual, it tells a story. So it says, like Timur, Martin, you're actually a stream of consciousness that is not a soul if you're Buddhist, or if you're Hindu, then you're a soul that has been incarnated across multiple lifetimes. And we're talking millions, if not billions, of lifetimes. And each lifetime generated karma that influenced your next linear birth. So after you die, then the next one happens. And that your job as someone seeking enlightenment is to not only realize the true nature of being, but to stop generating karma so that you are no longer part of what is known as samsara, or the wheel of reincarnation. And at that point, you will be liberated. In Buddhism, you'll reach nirvana. In Hinduism, you will attain moksha. But that's an individuated role. And so this is where I say there's no such thing. There is no individuated aspect of consciousness that travels from one vehicle to the next across lifetimes, because all vehicles are actually inhabited by God fully. So we have what makes individuation? Well, for me, it is the body. Your body is different from mine. Your body is located in a different space-time coordinate than mine. Therefore, we are different physical bodies. But the consciousness that is perceiving and experiencing itself through these different vehicles is identical. Yet, through your body, it is filtered through the energetic construct of your ego that says, I'm Timur. And through me, it's filtered through the energetic construct that says, I'm Martin. but without a body to hold that perspective together, there is no individuated consciousness. So this is where I don't believe in spirits, I don't believe in souls, I don't believe in astral realms, I don't believe in disincarnated beings of any sort, because this is where I use this phrase in my memoir, Being Infinite. I said, it's just God with no remainder. Whereas if we have a soul, that's a remainder. That's a part that's left out of God and has to maybe comes from God and then returns to God through a process. Okay, so now we can come back to the question if you want, but I want to just make the point then. So, in redefining it from a spiritual to an energetic process, my position is if we can introduce enough energy into the physical vehicle's system and the conscious system that resides and expresses through it, then we can actually break apart and dissolve all of the constructs of the ego. And then the self is able to experience and perceive itself as it is, which that is when we reach into the non-dual experience. It's just, oh, it's really all one. That's what it's always been and always will be. And I am just temporarily experiencing myself as the individuated person that I normally experience myself as. All
Hmm.
right, done with rant.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. That was awesome. Definitely my head is spinning a little bit trying to really wrap my mind around all of that. But I thought it was a yeah, great explanation of everything. I guess my question is it's still kind of around the other, the sense of other, the sense that, you're over there, I'm over here, but we're the same being sort of interacting with itself. Um, I'm kind of curious about like how does what are like the systemic workings behind that? Like is it we're the same consciousness, but like I just can't have access to your experience over there. Like it's just completely blocked out, or it's like, how does that work? Like what is another basically? What is another person if we're the
Yeah,
same being, you know?
yeah. So normally, in most circumstances, there are some basic energetic firewalls between partitions of consciousness, which is a really, really great thing. Um, because it would be really confusing if I were sitting here in my office and I started seeing through your eyes. I'd be like, "Whoa, wait, where did Moxie go? Um, uh, how do I get to my glass of water?" Right? Um, in certain circumstances, so this is a phenomenon that shows up in certain psychedelic experiences. Sometimes people do merge consciousness, and it's pretty freaky and weird. But most of the time, we have pretty solid energetic partitions, and that's a good thing because it would be very, very confusing when when we remove all of those barriers. It can get overwhelming, and even it takes a lot of energy to do that because the energetic constructs of the ego are incredibly resilient, which is good. We want energetically resilient egos. We want that to be there. Um, so most psychedelics in most circumstances won't fully dissolve those boundaries. And so there might be a little bit of crossover, but not much. But for example, if you take two people and if they both consume 5-MeO DMT at the same time, and if they are able to let go and dissolve all of the egoic structures, it's freaky weird because at that point, you literally cannot tell the difference between which one is me and which one is not me because it goes into a state of unity.
Hmm.
And as a temporary experience, that's great. But to try and navigate reality like that all the time, it would just be way too much information. So it's functional. It's evolutionarily functional that we are not in a state of access to all the information all the time. It would just be overwhelming. And that's the common perception. Like as you go up the scale of psychedelics, that people talk about how it becomes more and more overwhelming because there's more and more information. And it
Hmm.
becomes very difficult to parcel out like what's me, what's not me. And then eventually you can dissolve those boundaries. Um, so this is how God interacts with itself. And this also is what allows for the generation of meaning. Because if we were all fully aware that we're all just God interacting with itself and that everything is just me anyway, um, it kind of removes the sense of, oh, this is my life and this is important to me. And so these are my goals or my ambitions, or this is what I'm going to do, or this is my experience. In other words, it actually enters into more of a state of just complete complacency and perhaps even apathy where, no, I'm just
Mm,
going to sit here in full absorption all the time. So
mm,
by having this parceled out sense of identity, it actually does mean something to us if we perceive like, oh crap, a tiger is coming to eat my child. I'm going to do something about it
mm,
because we're invested in the apparent reality of being these separate beings and having these unique experiences that have consequences. And also, just from an intelligence perspective, one of the things I like to say is, well, God is the ultimate intelligence. And so it wants really sophisticated games and narratives to engage itself with.
mm.
But if we were just all completely in the non-dual, complete unitary perspective all the time, that'd be like going to watch a movie that's simply a blank white screen the whole time. And from the individuated perspective, we'd say like, well, nothing happened. Like, I wanted to see a movie. I wanted like stuff to happen. And like
Right.
this reality, this is God's doing of itself so that it is always thoroughly entertained and thoroughly invested in, I'm playing the game and this is exciting because there's consequences. It really does matter if I step in front of a bus or not, or if I allow the tiger to eat my child or not. Like, well,
Mhm.
why would I want to do that? And it matters when my dog comes up to me and just she's got that look of like, oh, I love you so much. And she's like, oh, I love you too. And just I'm so glad you're a part of my life, right? That we can't have that experience of sharing without a sense of separation. And that love, as the fundamental energy of being, actually really wants to be shared and to be
Mm,
mutually reciprocated. But if we're just in a state of absolute unity, we don't get to have that experience. So, this is, I like to say that reality is God's gift to itself so that it can actually forget who and what it is, so that it can experience the immediacy of individuated being and then receive the joys and benefits and the struggle and the suffering that comes with it.
mm. Beautiful. And so I guess on that point, it kind of reminds me of something you wrote in Being Human, your book, Being Human. Um, there's a part about like it's something around how, God could create this mansion, or castle from the outside, but he wanted or it wanted to be inside of it and experience the mansion from the inside. And I thought that was such a cool way of putting it. It's like this is the embodiment. This is this one being the universe experiencing through the pain, through the human trials and tribulations, through all the love and the loss and all that. And I thought that was such a cool way to put it. So I guess like my question is around manifestation. Like, is there a point to this? Like, is this just a game for God, or is this like just to be experienced for itself? Is there kind of like a plan? Is there something we should be doing, like a purpose, or is it just for pure creation, pure experience?
Well, here's where I think a good comparison or a good analogy could be with the production of art or the production of music or just the creation of anything. That for those of us who are creative types, um, we both enjoy the product and we also really enjoy the process. We enjoy the doing of like making stuff and creating stuff and exploring like what's possible. And then also we tend to enjoy improving our skills and challenging ourselves along the way. So like where does that passion, where does that come from? Where does that drive come from? Like, well, that's a fundamental drive of God, of that what we call creation, what we call the universe that we live in, reality. This is what happens when God gives itself full permission to creatively explore everything that's possible for it to do and to be. And so this is the ultimate work of art. And just like with a work of art, you can say, well, like, what's the point? What's the purpose? It's like the art is the purpose. The creating and enjoyment and the beingness of the art is the ultimate purpose. Now, so this is another place where I do tend to not take a quote spiritual view. So the teleological view, so if we're dealing with philosophy or theology, teleology means the idea that it's all going somewhere and there's a purpose. And this is where I kind of disagree, that I would say the existence of reality as it is, the purpose has already been fulfilled.
Mm,
That the purpose is being. And this is how being is exploring itself. So it's not that it's necessarily going anywhere. There's not something that we should be doing or should not be doing. But within that, as individuated expressions of this universal being and consciousness, we do have the ability to choose, can I be more authentically myself? Can I be more loving? Can I be more compassionate? Can I be clearer in myself? Can I be less taken in by confusion and hate and fear and rage? And can I come from a place of greater harmony, love, and compassion? But here's the thing is that there's no requirement for
mm,
that. So there's no God from outside directing like you got to do this, you got to do that, it's got to be this way and this is where it's going.
mm,
But I would take an evolutionary perspective on it. So this gets back to what you were saying from being human,
mm,
that we had the evolution of the universe, um, inorganic evolution for many billions of years. And then eventually conditions settled down and got right here on this planet that we know of, where biological life could start to evolve. And started with just single cell beings, and over many eons of time, eventually evolving into multicellular beings, and then eventually us that have this capacity for full self awareness. So now we as human beings, we have the capacity to evolve even further in that we can now not just have our individuated egoic perspective, but we can also enter into a non-dual experience and we can use that as a transformative process so that we can. I do like to say that the average human being is like a god toddler, bunch of little toddlers running around. They haven't really fully grown up yet. And so the toddlers, they're really likely to believe, if you tell them a fancy story, like, oh, well, here's the sacred book and this is what God wants you to do. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm all for that. But as we can mature, that we can actually move beyond that into more God-centered adults is what I would call them. And that would be, if lots of people did that, that would be an evolutionary shift because then we would have less attachment to religion, ideology, politics, because all of those are meta forms of egoic expression and identity. And so we could actually enter into a different phase of what I would consider to be human evolution. But that's a choice because it's not forced by anyone or anything. So it's not that there's this directive. Like Teilhard de Chardin was a Catholic theologian, and he was looking at evolution, and he said, "Well, I think we're moving towards some kind of omega point where it will be the ultimate evolution of consciousness." And that this is where reality is heading towards. Now, that's kind of been reconfigured in modern days to this notion of like a singularity with artificial intelligence or something like that. And it was reformulated by Terence McKenna and his theories of 2012 and the endpoint of history. And that's where, again, I would just disagree. It's like, no, reality is not heading towards some particular point. There's not a plan. This, it's ultimately, this is God's free for all. It's like, do what you want to do because that's all God is doing. It's like, let's just see where this will go. And that's part of, I think, the fundamental pleasure of being is that it's not structured. There isn't an end game. There isn't an end point. It's an exploration. It's not a journey towards a destination. It is all exploration and creative discovery, which is, I think, is more exciting.
Yeah, that's very freeing from the traditional dogma that we get from religion and even spiritual new age of, there's this thing we have to do and there's this pressure around how we have to act and when it's
Yeah,
just this, no, you're completely 100% God. Like you can, this is Play-Doh, this is a playground. You can do what you please and but there is like consequences and repercussions to things and it's very
yeah,
real in that sense. Um, but I was wondering like is where does love come into play? Like, is love just for our own enjoyment, or is love like, I don't want to say there's a purpose behind it, but like, is that maybe what God wants the most? Or, where does this like love component? Because I've heard things like love is the structure of reality, love is the whole point of the whole thing is to deepen and deepen into more love. So where would you place that on the, I guess, on the spectrum of the whole thing?
yeah. So the place I'd start with the answer is that in the depth of a full experience, and so maybe I'll just kind of articulate what that is first. So ordinary perception is dualistic. Ordinary experience, as I've kind of already hinted at, it's not bad, it's not wrong, it's not like, oh, that's dualism, that's bad. It's just the way things are, where I have a sense there's me here, and then there's a lot of that's not me. And that's great because, like, if I, Martin, am thirsty, I am going to want to find an object to satisfy my thirst, like, glass of water, found it, I can drink it. That's duality. Okay. And that's great. Um, so there's a sense of self and not self, me and not me, the subject and then the objects of the world. And for most of the time, that works really, really great for us to navigate reality and interact with other aspects of reality. But when we transcend this seemingly permanent divide, and this is a very definite threshold that when you're over it, everything becomes one, where there's no Martin and water. It's just everything is one. It's all one. There's no subject object divide. Now, within that, the fundamental energy that we can experience and seems to be the generative energy of everything else that exists as subject and object is this ecstatic energy of unconditional love. And the way that that is felt is just this vibration of absolute love where everything is embraced equally. And there's no judgment, there's no right, wrong, good, bad, worthy, unworthy. It's just the ecstasy of, oh my God, it's all love. It's just love. So that's why those of us who had had this experience would say that's the fundamental energy of being, is just this unconditional love. And as this unconditional love plays out, that's what reality is, because this is this love interacting with itself. And then we can also see words break down. So, because I'm calling it unconditional love, but we could also say this is pure energy. We could also say this is pure being. We could say this is pure consciousness. We could say that this is absolute truth. We could say this is the self. This is the I. This is the nature of being. So, love, energy, truth, these are all the same things, ultimately. So, then when we get back down into human form, we have particularized love. Like, I love my dog, Moxie, and I have a different relationship with Moxie than I do with other dogs. I love other dogs too. I mean, dogs are awesome. I love them. But I have a particular relationship with my dog, Moxie, where, um, you know, like if the neighbor's dog died, I would have sympathy and compassion with it. It's like, wow, that really sucks. My dog Moxie is old. She is not going to be with me for very many more years. And I assure you, it will be emotionally crushing for me because I love her as the particular being that she is. And that is my particular expression of that love and that experience of that love. And it comes with the price of pain because sooner or later, I am going to need to accept that she's going to die. And you can probably tell I'm tearing up a little bit just thinking about it because I love her so much. But that's the gift, to have the gift of like, oh, I love this dog and she loves me. Oh my God. I wouldn't give that up for anything, even knowing the pain that it's going to bring me when she dies. And that enriches my life in the just most beautiful way. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And then, even as I'm telling you all of this, I'm feeling that love and I'm feeling the truth of it as well. And that again, it goes back to that example that I gave. Like when you tell somebody, I love you, assuming you're not bullshitting, it's just this energy that you feel and you know that it's true. So that we, as these individuated beings, the more in alignment we are with truth and allow ourselves to express and experience and embody that, the more in alignment we are with this unconditional love that is the nature of being. But I also always, and I'm going to have to let her out. She's got to go bark at somebody. Um, but I just want to finish this thought first. We as individuated beings, we live in this container of unconditional love. But I always like to point out that that should not mean that we completely override our personal preferences and perspectives and experience, because then that just becomes spiritual gaslighting and spiritual complacency and what's the phrase? Spiritual,
Is it bypassing?
yeah, that's the one.
Yeah,
Spiritual
yeah.
bypassing. So, in other words, yes, I can love everyone and everything unconditionally. But man, if somebody comes up and treats Moxie poorly or like somebody like hits my dog, oh my God,
Mm,
that is going to push my buttons
mhm,
because I love her. She's my dog.
mhm.
I have a relationship with her, and
Yeah.
that's valid as well. That yes, we live in the context of unconditional love, but that doesn't mean that we need to just accept everything, and that it doesn't
Mhm,
mean that we shouldn't have personal preferences or desires, because that
mhm,
being an embodied being means living with desires and preferences.
mhm,
That
mhm,
I care about what happens to me. I care
mhm,
about what happens to my dog.
mhm.
I don't necessarily want to bring it into the political sphere at the moment, but this
That's
is
fine.
something that
Yeah.
people are trying to throw at me currently because I happen to care about the country that I live in and I care about
Mhm.
the direction that it's going.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I am happy to make certain statements publicly about what I think is going on.
Right,
And
right.
then sometimes people come back like, oh, well, aren't you like the non-dual guy? Isn't it supposed to all be love? Like,
Yeah.
why are you complaining?
Gaslighting, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I live here and because I care. All right, I gotta let
Yeah.
Moxie out.
Sure,
I'll be
sure.
right
Yeah,
back.
yeah. Thanks. Cool. Yeah. So, yeah, I was thinking about what you were saying about the love, the gaslighting, the spiritual bypassing, and I've definitely seen a good amount of that just in certain circles and places I've lived where, people are practicing yoga and meditation and things, but then there's kind of like this pressure to always be loving, and
Yeah,
it's like almost like if you're not, you're a horrible person, and um, yeah, I just found that not really cool, and also like the suppression of the desires, like one thing I was feeling was like it was too much striving to this ideal to be this like enlightened person, and it was just exhausting, and it was like, no, I actually want to go to Carnival, Brazil Carnival, and I want to party and dance and have fun and, just let go of all this kind of dogma. And I just feel like there was a lot of baggage around that, and I feel like there's kind of like this more authentic love of like, well, what do I actually feel? What's actually coming up, and what's the best way to be like a human with these desires, with these, and
Yeah.
do it and manage them consciously, but still honor them and not banish them and have like this kind of like punishing attitude towards ourselves.
Yeah. So that's where the recognition that truth is another synonym for this unconditional love is that if I truly do want to go to the carnival, that's my
Mhm.
embodiment and authentic expression of love because it's true.
Right.
Versus, no, I will sit home and meditate because I am just so spiritual. Then that's a false construct.
Right.
That's not true. Therefore, that's not actually love. That is attachment to an illusion.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this is a hard one for people to take because rightly or wrongly, we often conflate our human experience of love with what we imagine this unconditional divine love is. And we think it's, oh, well, it's more of the human, like, oh, I love you. Oh, I love you. I love you so much. I love you.
Right.
But okay, we got to remember, God loves itself so much that it subjects itself as you and I and everyone else to all the pleasures and all the pains of reality and is not just going to come in and fix it for us. So we can be suffering, we can, but please God, help me as much as we want. And it's like, I am you, you're on your own. Good luck. I love you. Not going to fix it for you. You've got to choose. So that, in other words, God will never tell itself what to do. And it's not just going to make itself do something. And it's not just going to go and fix something for it because it's unconditional. So your suffering has just as much a right to exist as your pleasure.
Mm.
And every disease and malformed whatever has just as much, it's just as much as anything else. So God's not a problem solver. It's not a fixer. So this is also where I say, well, look, if you want to pray, you can pray because it can help center your mind, your intentions, and you can get clarity within yourself. But if you're expecting someone or something to answer those prayers, it just doesn't work that way because it's just
Mm.
you.
Mm.
And you are not open to bartering with yourself. You can't cajole yourself. You can't force yourself. You can't require yourself. It's God's free for all. That
Mm.
God loves itself, that it's just letting it be free, do what you want. It's up to you. Yes, there are consequences that come with your actions, but there's no requirement that you be this way, that way, or the other way. But here's where we get into personal motivation. The clearer you get within yourself about what is truly authentic for you, the happier you will be because you are more in alignment with yourself and the more satisfying your life will be. It might
Mm.
not look how other people think it should look. And
Mhm.
it might not fit with the teachings of what this community or what that guru or what that spiritual guide said. But if it's authentic for you, it's going to make you a happier being. And then when you're a happier being, you are more likely to extend genuine compassion, not forced spiritual requirement compassion to someone else. And that also gives us the courage that, again, because love is truth, love is truth. So sometimes truth means I'm not happy with you right now, or I don't like what you've done right now, right? There's a lot of room for tough love, and it's not all cuddly, feel good love. Let's just all be in harmony. That sometimes disharmony is actually the more authentic energy.
Mm.
And so there is room for disagreement. There is room for criticism. There is room for judgment. Um, just as long as we're not making them cosmic, right? God
Right.
hates this and God loves that. No, no. I, in this moment, do not like this situation. And I'm going to speak truthfully to that. And I'm going to speak critically of that if that's what I'm feeling because that's authentic. But I'm not residing in a projection of what I think I should be. I'm going to reside in what I authentically am in any given moment. And then we're also less attached to how that is expressed. So it gives us this freedom to be what we genuinely are in any given moment and in any given context and situation. And we're not protecting the image of, oh, well, I'm this spiritual guru or whatever, which that's an image that needs to be maintained. So it opens up this level of freedom to, wow, I can just be as I am. That's all I need to do. And the more I just am authentically myself and authentically embodying and expressing myself, the more I get out of my life and my sense of being and a greater sense of freedom and liberation I experience.
Mm.
And like, wow, that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like there's so much programming and shoulds and just holding back of what we really want to do and how we really want to live, whatever that looks like. And there's just so much, um, yeah, just pain and shadow and fear around that, just fully living our authentic self. So I think it takes a lot of courage to really step into that. But that's what's beautiful about, the work you're doing and what you're embodying. Because as I said before, I feel like you really embody what you talk about. You're really living that authentic life. Um, I do kind of want to go back to the non-dual awakening
Hmm.
aspect of so like when you work with someone who takes 5-MeO and they have this like non-dual awakening, what do they learn about reality? Like what do they figure out a cup is, or is it like I'm like what is this made out of, and like what is like the metaphysics of that oneness, that awakening?
Yeah. It's pretty funny. Um, because different people will, they will let it land in different ways. But so first of all, 5-MeO DMT. So this molecule, I happened to give it the name of the God molecule back in like 2007 and 2008. No, 2008 is when I gave it the name, the God molecule. That I had my first full experience with it in January of 2008. And it's most often taken through vaporization. So I vaporized this. And even as I was taking in the hit, I had not even fully taken in the hit where the energy was just expanding infinitely. And I knew even as I was taking it, it was just like, oh my God, this is it. And it just opened up to this infinite experience of what I was describing earlier, just wave after wave of pure unconditional love. It's like this full body orgasm where all sense my eyes were wide open, but the world dissolved into this fractal, scintillating unity of this pure white light with these rainbow refractions on the edges. And it's just like, oh my God, it's God. It's me. It's God. Oh my God, it's me. It's God. Oh, thank you. And I was just blown away. And after and also in those first few moments, there's also the ego is like, oh shit, you've done it now. Like you're dying, man. That you are not ever coming back from this. You're getting absorbed into the infinite. And then as the energy dies down, then it was like one layer after another of the ego recoalesce. And then eventually it's like, oh yeah, I'm this dude named Martin and I'm in this guy's house in Ashland, Oregon. Like what the hell just happened? But prior to that, I had had experiences that I would call non-duality within duality. So this is pretty common on psychedelic experiences. Like somebody's tripping mushrooms, they're like, "Oh man, yeah, we really are all one. Like I'm a part of everything. I can feel it. Yeah, all of life is one, right?" So there's still a sense of subject. There's still a sense of object. There's still a sense of stuff and thingness happening.
Mm.
So that's non-duality within duality. And I'd had those experiences. but they're still filtered through the ego. And so this was the
Mm.
first experience that I'd ever had where there was no ego present whatsoever. And so this is the potential of having a 5-MeO DMT experience. And most psychedelics do not override the ego. So they alter the ego, they open it up, they soften it, but they don't override it in the same way that 5-MeO DMT does because they're just not powerful enough because the ego is incredibly resilient. So
Mm.
anyway, that's why I called it the God molecule. Now, when people have this experience with 5-MeO, a lot of it depends on their background about how they're able to sort of absorb the experience. So, for example, I myself, I was a self-described spiritual seeker, but was not really identified with any particular spiritual or religious tradition. You know, I'd studied a lot of philosophy, studied a lot of a religion, and I was just sort of a truth seeker. Like I'm looking for it. And then after this is like, whoa, I found it. This was the experience I've been looking for my entire life. And I thought I knew what the experience was, but I had no idea because now I understand every idea is just an egoic parceling down of this infinite nature into, oh yeah, I could say that's infinite. So now I can use that word and it makes a lot of sense to me, but it doesn't actually communicate what the experience is. Or I could say, oh, it's pure unconditional love. You're not going to know what that means until you've had that experience. So, for example, if you take somebody who is a devout Christian, where God is transcendent, God is other, and Jesus is this very special divine being and Lord and Savior, for some Christians, this can be a very upsetting experience because they might go through it and then they'll come back and say, I think I'm God. Am I Jesus? Like, what's going on here?
Mm.
Um, and this actually, in a statement in mainstream Islam, in Shia and Sunni Islam, if you even say this out loud, that's a death sentence to say, I am God,
Mm.
because that's considered heretical to make that statement.
Mm.
And then it's funny, you can take other people, and as their ego comes back, they'll just be like, I knew it. I knew it. I always knew. I didn't know I knew it, but I knew it. I knew it. I'm God. And then other people, they're really their ego is not comfortable with it, so they're like, oh, I think maybe I'm the infinite one, but I can't say that. I can't let myself say that. So, but the experience itself is fundamentally identical in the sense that there's this sense of absolute unity, absolute oneness, and it also presents with this immediacy and clarity that's unprecedented. So it's undeniable.
Mm.
And but people can try and deny it. I mean, sure, you can do whatever you want, right? You're free. You can do whatever you want. But in the moment, it just presents as, oh, this is obvious. And actually, I've always known it, but somehow I forgot it or didn't want to remember. Oh, there she is knocking. Just let me let the dog back in.
Sure.
And then I'd also add that because again, a lot depends on the person and their background and what they're ready to experience within the fullness of the experience. For some people, the experience presents as an absolutely infinite void of nothingness because there's no subjects, there's no objects, there's no thing there. And sometimes they're not quite in the harmonic resonance with that universal love. So they might just perceive it as like, oh my God, it's like infinite nothingness. Some people perceive that as very peaceful. It's like, oh, nothing to worry about. Everything is perfect because there's just infinite nothingness. Yet some people, their ego might react to this is terrifying because it's like infinitely, eternally alone. And, you know, sort of the God is the father and we are all the children or something. That's very comforting to human beings because it also says, like, oh, God's in charge, got a
Mhm.
plan. It's not my responsibility. I just got to do the right things and then God will love me. And like, okay, that's comforting.
Mhm.
because that's the way that the ego works, especially as biological beings, that we respond to authority and who's in charge and what's my role and what am I supposed to do. But this strips all that away. So it's really quite radical in that sense. And not everyone can really absorb that or perceive that in a beneficial way. And that it also tends to produce what we call ontological shock, meaning that whatever you thought reality was, it's not that. And this is a hard thing to grasp because I'm sure that there are some people listening to this who maybe have not had this experience, but they're like, "Yeah, this it sounds like that's right. Like I'm vibing on what this guy is saying." But then you're gonna create an idea of what you think that is, and it's not that because every idea, this is what I said before, every idea is just a parceling out within duality. So this is beyond conceptuality. It's beyond ideas. It's beyond words. We can't, like, if I say banana to you, I'm going to assume you've eaten a banana before and you're able to call up the picture in your mind and you can probably imagine like, yeah, banana tastes like that. It has sort of that texture. And like, if it gets a little too ripe, then, oh yeah, it's all mushy like that. And then if it's not ripe enough, it's a little bit hard. And yeah, it's got the stringy things you got to pull off. So, you know, you can understand banana if I say banana. But when I say infinite, eternal, one, unity, most of us don't have a reference for that. And so anything that we come up with is just going to be an estimate at best. And so this is beyond what we can conceive. And it is only something that can be experienced directly. But that's the beauty of it, is that in potential, if not in actuality, but in potential, any person on the planet can have this experience. We have the biological capacity to do it. And yes, we could spend years meditating and we could practice yoga and we could do all those things. If you want to do that, that's great. But the high velocity vehicle actually is 5-methoxy dimethyltryptamine because it's powerful. It functions as a neurotransmitter and it's powerful enough to completely disrupt and override the energetic structures of the human ego. And also, the human body produces 5-MeO DMT along with DMT. So we are fundamentally psychedelic beings in that sense. We share this with all mammals, that we all produce these two very powerful psychedelics. So this is just the energetic shortcut to having this experience. And I will also say that, so I don't facilitate directly the experience anymore. I did from 2009 to 2016, but I've retired from doing that. But when I was doing that, I did work with a lot of people who also were self-described spiritual seekers. A lot of people had spent many years meditating. A lot of people came to me and said, "Oh yeah, I've had a non-dual experience before, so I have an understanding of this." And I never once ever worked with somebody who, after experienced 5-MeO, ever said, "Oh, yeah, I've had that experience before." They always,
Mm.
everyone said, "Oh my God, nothing like that." Like I thought I had had a full non dual awakening experience, but not at that order of magnitude. Nothing comparable
Yeah.
to that. So I do consider it to be the premier reality
Mm.
vehicle for this kind of experience.
Totally, totally. That brings up a really really like a burning topic for me around um psychedelics versus, non-dual awakening in a more traditional yogic, meditative, contemplative path. And in researching for this podcast and just being in, like the spiritual space for the last 10 years, this seems to be something that there is so much debate around this, and there really doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground. It's kind of like there's two camps. It's like you can use them to awaken, or like they're destroying your subtle body. It's not a real awakening. It's gonna cause problems. It's gonna, it's not gonna cause like I'm sure you've heard like Nirbija Samadhi, where it's like all the seeds of ego are basically burned. So it's like that's the full like non-dual awakening. So yeah, I'm super curious. Like, what is your take on this debate, these kind of two camps, and also like really like psychedelics really creating that permanent like that cessation of the ego or that like non-dual realization. Is that possible, or is it more of like a peak experience that comes and goes? This is also a large debate on the other side that people use. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, sorry, voice squeaked. Fundamentally, I think that really what this is more than anything else is different ego camps making claims. You know, it's very common among self-described spiritual folks to say like, "Oh yeah, that's not real," and you've got to do it on your own, and they've got this sense of spiritual ego and superiority about them. One of the ways I like to counter that is that, well, actually, historically speaking, I think human beings were using psychedelics before any development of any religion or spiritual tradition, that's probably the original form of spirituality. And even through historical records and archaeology and things like that, we can see that psychedelics have been used in human cultures for millennia and actually seem to form the basis for a lot of Hinduism and Buddhism and these yogic paths. And that there's a pretty good argument that the whole yogic and meditative traditions that they actually developed when people migrated out of areas that had easy access to psychedelics. So it's actually a form of compensation. Um, but anyway, when we get into like issues of, oh, well, you're blowing out your aura or, your chakras or whatever, or then we're getting into metaphysics. And that's just a place where I tend to say like, but that's like metaphysics. And those are all beliefs that we can neither confirm nor deny these things because these are metaphysical beliefs. And I don't happen to buy your beliefs. I don't believe that. And so what we really need to do is we need to look at the practical side of things. Now, can somebody take 5-MeO DMT once and then enter into a permanent state of liberation? I seriously doubt it. And one of the things I say in my books, and I've said this many times, is actually, I don't care how many non-dual awakening experiences you've had. If you're not integrating that and landing that in an embodied way within your being, then all you're doing is chasing after experiences. And those are great experiences, but are they going to really transform you? No. So that's why I always like being a little bit edgy and a little bit punny. I enjoy doing that. So my newest book that I wrote last year is 5-MeO DMT Integration, and the subtitle is Embodying Non-Duality is Not What You Think.
Right.
Um, and so, for one, we're getting to this point of whatever you think it is, it's not that. And that the real thing is about embodying it. And that's where I start to use the words of it's an energetic process of recalibration and reformatting within yourself. Now, I consider things like yoga and meditation to be a much slower methodology that has the potential to produce similar results, but it's a lot slower. This is definitely a high speed route. And it's also very easy for people to get sucked into metaphysics and beliefs and doctrines and dogmas. There's a lot of that in the psychedelic world and in the psychedelic communities. And there's a lot of what I would consider over spiritualization that takes place. And it's just, it's hard really living in authentic liberation because it's really destructive in the sense of the human ego likes to rely on systems of meaning and value and identities and communities and things like that. And if you're really going to live in this, it like strips all of that away. And it takes everything that we think about reality and it just shatters it. And so you need to have a lot of determination. Like one of the things I've said is that you have to be completely committed to truth. If you're going to be using psychedelics for this liberation process, you have to be absolutely committed to truth and unwilling to compromise anywhere along the way. And if you're not, then you're not going to make it because especially when we're dealing with psychedelics. I mean, there's lots of trippy shit that happens, right? There's a lot you're gonna see and experience, and it can be very easy to reify aspects of one's experience. You know, like we were talking about reincarnation earlier. Um, this is one of the things that shows up in psychedelic experiences. That people say, "Oh, I experienced a past life,"
Mhm.
and then it becomes a marker for egoic identity. It's like, yeah, in that past life, I was an Egyptian and doing this and that. And then people start to build an identity around it. And, I like to say, look, there's only one being in consciousness. So you potentially have access to any information in potential, at least. But we take it personally. And then we use our spiritual experiences to make stories about ourselves. And then people say, oh, well, I'm at this level and I want to go to this level. And this other person's up at this level. And this person has, they've activated their DNA this much. And then this person has ascended to this level. And now this one's up over here. And then we create stories, we create metaphysical architectures for that. And then we exist in communities that reaffirm that. And then other people will come in and it's like, oh, your vibration's really low, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, your vibe is like really low or whatever. And so then, oh, well, I'm not doing it right. And so then we
Uh-huh.
attach to exterior authorities. And that's the thing. You've got to be committed to finding it within yourself and living as your own authority. And even, I mean, it's ironic because I write a lot of books and I do consider myself an authority on a lot of these topics, but don't just take my word for it. Don't ever do that. Don't ever be like, oh, well, Martin knows what he's talking about. Well, yeah, I do know what I'm talking about, but you got to find it for yourself. You've got to go through it yourself, and it's a process. It's not about singular experiences, and you've got to see the process through. And that process, it can be really, really unsettling. It can be very disturbing, and it can really challenge your sense of self, your sense of reality. I am personally impressed that I made it through because there were passages of my own experience where it really seemed like, am I going crazy? Am I schizophrenic? Like, what the hell is going on here? Am I losing my grip on reality? But I persevered and I was really tenacious. Like, no, I am committed. I want to know what's true, what's really going on here.
Mhm.
So I made it through. And it happened to be at a time of my life where I was able to do that. I didn't have a lot of other commitments that would have kept me grounded in normal 3D reality. And I really could just, I'm going to see this thing through to the end no matter what.
Mm.
And honestly, most people aren't ready to do that. And they might not be at a place in their lives where they're able to do that. So it's intense. This is way more intense than meditating or doing yoga or anything else. This is
Mm.
intensity to the nth degree,
Mm.
especially if you're working with something like 5-MeO DMT. There is nothing more intense that anyone can ever experience.
Mm.
Um, but I love the fact that in potential, at least anyone could get a glimpse or have the opportunity to have this non-dual experience. And even one experience can really help reframe your entire sense of self and your life. But it's not going to land you in a place of permanent enlightenment.
Right. But
Yeah.
eventually, but what you're saying is like eventually, if you work with it enough, you keep coming, you keep committing to that truth, you can use particularly 5-MeO to actually liberate yourself and actually, live an awakened, like a permanently awakened life.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Mhm.
absolutely certain of that. And the
Wow.
reason why is because I went through it myself. So
Yeah.
it's like, look, I did it. There's nothing special about me
I was
other
gonna
than
ask
maybe
you,
I'm like really committed.
do you feel like you maybe that was like it was a like a special case or anything like that, or have you seen a lot of people do the same thing that you have with, or is that level of commitment rare?
Yeah, I really, really personally wish that I could say, like, yeah, I've seen other people do it. And the truth is, no, I haven't.
Mm,
I haven't. I try and I put out the guidebooks, I put out the information,
mm,
and I've You know, other people have, I've seen elements of my own process that people have experienced. And so I'm like, yeah, yeah, I mean, that's it. You're on your way. But in terms of like really reaching the same point of resolution and sort of, as I called it, like this point of completion, this point of absolute transformation that took place, I haven't seen it in anybody else. And I would
Mm,
love to. And I know, I mean, even that's a statement that I've been making for years now. And sometimes people are like, well, who the fuck do you think you are? What makes you think you're so special or whatever? And it's like, look, I'm just trying to be honest. Like, I
mm,
have not seen it.
yeah.
I haven't.
Yeah, I guess it goes, I mean, I think it's a super rare thing in any path. If you even look at like Zen
Yeah.
meditation, if I mean, I know you're well versed in Zen. If you look at people doing Kundalini yoga, I mean, the amount that actually have that full awakening and it sticks is rare no matter what. So I think it's just
Yeah.
maybe that's also a factor. But yeah, speaking for
Yeah.
myself, I've done maybe around 50 to 100 psychedelic ceremonies. Everything from like ayahuasca, LSD, MDMA, mushrooms. But actually the one that I haven't done is 5-MeO. And I'm super curious about it, but I'm also super afraid of it.
Yeah.
So maybe just for other people that might be listening and feeling the same way, like for me at least, it feels like it's just this next level thing. It's just like it's gonna break all these barriers, and maybe I won't come back. And what if I go crazy and all these things? Um, so I guess, what do you tell people when they have these come up, and how can they kind of still maybe have the courage to face the medicine if they want to, and work through those fears?
Yeah. Well, first, I always do like to promote the idea that I think everybody should be fully educated about 5-MeO before they make any decisions about whether they want to do it or not. Um, because it is one of these things that way more so than any other psychedelic, there's no coming back from it. You can't undo it. You can't just go back to how things were the way before. And no amount of experience with other psychedelics can actually prepare you for what's going to happen with 5-MeO. It's not just next level. It is beyond the next level. It there's just no comparison, unfortunately or fortunately. Um, so there's actually this sort of paradoxical in the sense that sometimes people with no psychedelic experience whatsoever, they can go to 5-MeO as their very first psychedelic experience, and it's super, super easy because they have no prior psychedelic experience. And then people who do have prior psychedelic experience, I mean, within a couple seconds, 5-MeO DMT moves beyond any other psychedelic experience you've ever had. And so that can be startling for somebody who has a variety of experiences. And I also do like to let people know that the intensity of it is more than you can even possibly imagine. It is not possible for you to conceive of how intense and monumental and the magnitude of this experience.
Hmm.
And some people react in a really traumatic way. So it's not always like my first experience, because I didn't know anybody else who had ever experienced it and I had no prior experience. I just thought like, oh my God, this is the easiest thing in the world. You just like take a hit and like 10 seconds later, it's like nothing but God. Like, wow, so easy.
Hmm.
But then as I had the opportunity to observe more people, I really quickly realized like, oh, there's all kinds of ways that the ego can hold on or can fight with this. And what I thought was beyond my choice, I actually now understand that, well, I chose to let go and trust completely. And not everybody is in that position. They're not necessarily ready. And that's not to issue any kind of judgment about anyone. But it's just, this is huge. That, I mean, I can't put it any more directly that encountering yourself as God, there is nothing that exists within reality that is more monumental than that.
Hmm.
So you got to be willing to, I'm going to take the good with the bad. So I do like to say that there are two very general trajectories that people take. And this is provided that they get a sufficient enough dose. For some people, they open up to the infinite right away. And I like to call it the bliss bomb, the divine bliss bomb. And it is just amazing.
Mm.
Excuse me. And then often for those folks, if they continue to work with it additional times, then it actually becomes more personal where now you're, because all of us have at least some degree of suppressed and unprocessed energies and materials inside of us. Because we all take stuff and we like, oh, stuff it down. Like, oh, don't say that. Don't be like, no, 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 don't feel that. Oh, that makes me uncomfortable. And then some of us have a lot more because we've been through a lot of traumatic experiences. And 5-MeO has the capacity to find any of this from any point in your life.
Mm.
Even stuff that you think, oh yeah, I got over that time that my dad beat me or whatever. I've talked to a therapist for 20 years about it, and you know, I've got it that all resolved. No, you don't. There's still
Mm.
more. And sometimes you have to go through it in a really archetypal way. So then it can become more personal where now you are releasing and processing all of these stored up energies. And that can be, it's cathartic. It's wonderful, but it can be really challenging. It could be really difficult. And it's super, super, super intense. And then other people, they have to go through releasing all this stuff first and kind of opening up their capacity to trust, to surrender, to allow and love, and that they might need to go through a lot of dark and challenging stuff first. And then eventually they get to the divine bliss bomb. And it was like,
Mm.
oh, this is what I've been looking for. Here I am. Um, but it's intense that,
Mm.
you know, there's kind of this phrase out there of like, oh yeah, ayahuasca, one night of ayahuasca was worth 10 years of therapy. And
Mhm.
well,
Yeah.
like 5 minutes with 5-MeO DMT is like a lifetime of therapy or infinite lifetimes of potential therapy.
Mm.
So it's intense
Mm.
and that it's not something that should be taken lightly and that there are a lot of after effects in the sense that most people will continue to energetically process after the event. So, like most psychedelics, you can go and you take them, and then when they're done, they're done. And you might have a lot to think about, or you might have a lot of feelings or whatnot, but you know, they're for the most part, they're done. 5-MeO is not done because you've just set off a cosmic supernova in the core of your being, and
Mm.
there are going to be additional waves of energy processing through you. So
Mm.
this is where I always like to say that people should really be educated about it first so that you understand I'm getting into something that is potentially really, really life changing and it might really
Right.
fundamentally change my view of myself and reality in a way that nothing else ever has. And here, again, the fundamental distinction, especially with people with prior psychedelic experiences, is that 99% of all psychedelic experiences still reside within the realm of duality. So there's still a sense of yourself there experiencing something. And there's subject object is there. And that's convenient for the ego because that allows us to create a narrative and it's like, okay, well, here's me and here's the weird aliens. And then there are the angels. And then like, oh, there are the devils. Like, oh, let's avoid them. Right. So,
Mhm.
and there's a sense you can kind of steer it and you can kind of say, hey, do I need to look at this right now? Maybe we can do this later. 5-MeO is not like that. It's just everything. And there's no self there that's able to direct it in any way, shape, or form. And it also becomes a very physically embodied experience for many people where their bodies are reacting in ways that they have zero control over.
Mm.
And sometimes it's very dramatic. So there's lots and lots of things that go on there. So I just always encourage people like, well, learn about it first. Don't do it just because you've heard about it and like, oh, that sounds good. Like actually learn about it and
Mhm.
then find a good facilitator that you feel you can trust and
Right.
that if you take enough, you will think that you are dying.
Mhm.
And so if you're not ready for like to die, don't do it because you're going to think you're dying. And
Mhm.
um, I like to point out, like recently, these folks came from Missouri. I think they came from Missouri, that they wanted to give me the opportunity to try injectable 5-MeO DMT. So I was like, okay, cool, come. So they
Mm.
came and they shot it in my arm. And for your viewers, you can go watch the video. It's on my YouTube channel, the Entheogenic Evolution. You can see me right here having this injectable 5-MeO. And it was the first time I had done a full release dose of 5-MeO in like 5 or 6 years. And, I've been through it just hundreds and hundreds of times, but I was impressed that even for me, who knows all of this, it still, as it was reaching the peak, I still felt I'm never coming back. This is it. I will never see my son again. I will never see my wife again. I will never see my
Mm.
dog again. Like this is it. So it always presents that way. And it's very convincing. And even though I know, no, I'm going to come back and I'm going to feel my body and I'm going to be like, oh, yay, I still get to be here. Um, it doesn't present that way. It will always present as this is the cosmic oblivion and orgasm into the infinite from which there will be no reassembly.
Mm.
So it's big.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something you got to prep for. That's not just like taking some shrooms at a party or
Nope.
taking some MDMA with your girlfriend. Like
No.
that's a lifetime. That's almost like a cosmic, I don't want to say soul commitment, but it's like a cosmic, like it's like this is huge. This is what the monks and the sages and all these people who went out into the caves and the mountains have been searching for and striving for, and like it's not just, it's this huge thing.
Yeah.
Um, I was curious about that, like the paths with, like Advaita Vedanta, Kashmir Shaivism, also like paths of like meditation and yoga, because I know you practiced Zen for a while too. Do you think that they're going to the same place, or do you think that it's like the same mountaintop but different paths, or is 5-MeO somewhere taking you somewhere completely different? And is it even possible to get to those same realizations through yoga and meditation, or does 5-MeO just take you somewhere that we literally, as in our human consciousness, cannot reach, or is it possible to get there through those other paths?
So I think it's ultimately the same unity, but what I think distinguishes 5-MeO from most other modalities is just the overwhelming energetic intensity of it.
Okay. Hmm.
So, like with Zen meditation, the emphasis tends to be on calming, right? Where we are calming the mind, calming reactions, bringing things down to a state of stillness and equanimity. And then you can perceive it's all one, right? In the calmness of it.
Hmm.
Other modalities, such as like Tantric Buddhism, does a lot of work with energies. And they work with sexual energies to have more of these orgasmic, ecstatic experiences. Or like Shaivism, like also, it's like Shiva's ejaculating out of the top of his head. So that's a more embodied approach to it, where we're kind of using these desires and sensations and energies in the body to kind of reach this more explosive kind of event.
Hmm.
Um, so it really depends on the modality, but what in my assessment, a lot of people who have had non-dual experiences via meditation is that it tends to be more of a mental event of like, oh, this absolute clarity or this absolute silence or this absolute stillness,
Hmm.
which is very, very valuable. And that's an aspect of the experience, but it's not the fully energetically active
Hmm. Hmm.
aspect of the experience.
Wow. Yeah.
So I do think that there are some phenomenological differences in that sense. And
Hmm.
what's very interesting about 5-MeO is that once someone has had a 5-MeO DMT experience, um, because the body produces 5-MeO DMT, a lot of people find that they can spontaneously have very similar, if not identical, experiences afterwards. Now, a lot of times this happens spontaneously and outside of someone's control, which can be very frightening for people. So these are called reactivations, is the term that we use in the
Mm.
5-MeO world. But then you can also learn how to energetically open up to that level. And so you can start having that experience. And then, like when I reached my turning point, um, it was a 5-MeO DMT experience that pretty much kept going for about 3 months.
Wow.
And during
Damn.
that time period, I had to go to the university and teach my class. And it was really weird because then I'd be teaching class and all the ego constructs would come back. It's like, okay, cool. And then I'd go home and then it just like, it's just like, I'm right back in it. And it was just
Wow.
like this constant opening and closing and kind of these
Mm.
undulations of energy. And so this is kind of similar to what people call like a Kundalini awakening or something like that. But I just think that the energetic levels, it's just way, way more intense. But when we look at, for example, if we're doing a brainwave analysis, like the scientific studies have been done with like really advanced meditators, like from particularly the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and the brainwave analysis shows that they're in gamma waves, which is the highest frequency, most coherent waveform that the brain can produce. EEG studies of people on 5-MeO. I had one done on myself. That's also a video people can see on my YouTube channel with the little funny mushroom hat
Yeah.
on.
Mhm.
That when you go into these non-dual states on 5-MeO, you are also going into gamma wave in your brain. Now, gamma is something that most people have never experienced. We've all experienced alpha and beta and theta and delta, but gamma is really, really rare. So for meditators to reach gamma, they actually need to spend many years, if not decades, of practice before they can actually start to generate. This is why they only do these studies with really advanced meditators. But here you can, in potential, again, not always in actuality, but in potential, you could theoretically take anyone, give them 5-MeO DMT, and they will have an experience of gamma waves for the first time in their
Wow.
life.
Wow.
So at the neurological level, I think that there's something ultimately that's just very similar going on. But again, I think that the energetic intensity of 5-MeO is fundamentally unique because, like, when it's really in this ecstatic form, I mean, just think of the most powerful orgasm you've ever had with someone that you really deeply love, not just like casual sex orgasm, but like with someone that you're really feeling a sense of unity and bondedness with. And now just multiply that an infinite time. That's what we're talking about.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. So,
She's barking. She sees something. No bears though. I'm always looking for bears.
do you guys have them out there?
Yeah, actually,
Oh,
every
cool.
bear I have ever seen in Oregon has
Yeah.
been right here in my backyard.
No way.
Yeah, it's kind of a throughway for them. So I gotta let her out. She's got to bark at
Yeah,
something.
for sure. So, another thing I was wondering about was around the waking up aspect. I don't know if you're familiar with like Ken Wilber's work, but there's like the aspect of waking up, and then there's growing up, and there's kind of like this aspect of like we can have these awakening experiences, but then within the ego, there are these like developmental levels, these kind of like emotional regulation and, um, different cognitive capacities and things like that. What's your take on that? Is there kind of like like the ego as a structure when it's like, can that grow on its own? Or is it best to just kind of dissolve that less, make that less and less, if that makes sense? I'm kind of wording that weird, but does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess the way that I would respond to that is that primarily what I'm looking to inspire and promote is just this idea of authenticity.
Hmm.
And that, and I would say conscious authenticity. So the ego starts to develop when we are infants, and it's always done in context, right? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. So the ego develops in response to how do my parents respond to me? Um, what is my environment? And then the events that happen to me create my ego. But so I like to give the example of, let's say someone is born into a deeply conservative religious family. And then as they're growing up, they start to realize, like, oh, I'm attracted to a person of the same sex. Like that's just what I naturally gravitate towards.
Mm.
But oh, my parents don't like that, and then God's gonna hate me. And so then they're gonna develop all of these emotional and mental complexes within themselves. And then they're probably going to need to go through, either I'm going to hide it my whole life, or I'm going to have to go through some kind of coming out process, and then might struggle with loving myself and or accepting myself. Or someone who grows up in a family where they're abused or they're traumatized, or maybe they're growing up in a war-torn country where they learn that it just life is not safe. I don't know when the bombs are going to drop. Maybe they've seen mom and dad get blown up in front of them. They're going to develop beliefs and ideas. And then also, we are influenced by our culture and society about what's true, what's not true, what's right, and what's wrong. And a lot of these things might be neutral, but a lot of them impact how we think of ourselves and what level of love and trust and forgiveness we give ourselves, and what permissions or judgments and denials that we impose upon ourselves about how we allow ourselves to be and how we allow ourselves to express. So I mainly see this as a process of, especially when we're working with psychedelic medicines, we have the potential to, as I mentioned before, release whatever stored energy is inside us that where we've like, oh, I hate myself because of that, or I can't express that, right? All that stuff starts to come up and out. And this is why psychedelics are so great as an adjunct to therapy, because, we can go talk with a therapist about all the traumatic things that happen to us and how bad we feel, and they can give us good advice for how to manage that. But psychedelics go and find, like, oh, here's the energy of it. So let's actually transmute and move that energy out. And then
Mhm.
now you're clean. But if we're not learning how to authentically choose ourselves in a state of love and trust, then we can clear out as much as we want, but then we will go and unconsciously repackage everything and stuff it back down inside. And then you, like, a few minutes later, it's like, oh, well, I felt great for a couple months, but now I'm right back where I was. So it's about going through this process. Again, I always use this word process. It's a process. It's not about singular events. It's a process of
Mm.
encountering the places we're withholding or repressing or suppressing within ourselves, then also encountering where we are attached to false beliefs or false illusions or false standards that are not authentic for us. And then we have the capacity to also bring unconscious beliefs and patterns to the surface. Like a common one, especially when we're working with 5-MeO, because it gets to the core of our being, is that, like, a question I like to ask people is, like, do you love yourself unconditionally? And a lot of people say, well, I'd like to, but no, I actually don't. Like, I get on myself a lot. And so as people go through the process, that they learn, like, wow, I've really been hating myself. I've really been judging myself. And maybe I picked that up from my parents or whatever, but I chose to believe it. And unconsciously, I had this little kernel of, you suck, like, deep inside myself. And so I built my whole life and identity around that belief that I suck. And then I made sure that all my relationships reflected that truth back to me and reaffirmed, like, yeah, that's right, I suck.
Mm.
So as we go through this, we're unloading all of this. And then we have the potential to consciously choose, like, recognize, okay, there's the programming, there's the pattern, and I choose otherwise. And, like, for some people, they refer to it as, intrusive thoughts, like, you suck, you suck, you suck, you can't do it. So it doesn't necessarily stop those thoughts, but it can give us the capacity to say, I hear you, and I'm choosing not to believe you. I'm not attaching my identity to that.
Mhm.
So it gives us these experiences through this process to cultivate this capacity for more genuine, authentic, free, liberated being that is less structured by the wounds and traumas and unconscious patterning of the past so that we can more available to whatever is present in this moment, and also gives us the opportunity to energetically reformat so that we now have permission within ourselves to, I'm just going to be myself. Like, I never would have said this before, but now I'm going to say it because it's true and authentic for me. So it really has this capacity. And
Mm,
here, I myself, I don't really get into systems. So I think Ken Wilber is great. A lot of people in the psychedelic world these days, they're using like internal family systems, therapy, and
mm,
like parts work and things like that. And, that's great. I just I don't align myself with those.
mm,
Because I just look at it as, look, everyone has the potential to be completely and fully authentically themselves and to be evolved into that state. But we have adopted a lot of structures that imprison us along the way. But because we built the prison and we are the prisoner and we are also the prison guard, that means we have the capacity to change all of that. But again, it does matter about how far are you willing to go? How much are you willing to encounter? How much are you willing to face yourself? And that can be daunting and that can be quite challenging. And then there can also be literally a lot of throwing up and purging and diarrhea and weird stuff along the way because we hold everything we hold in our body. Everything we've
mhm,
ever experienced, we're holding energetically in our body. So it's a lot. And especially if you work with 5-MeO DMT, like a common descriptor is, man, the whole universe was turning inside out through my body. And that was super intense. And like, I'm glad I went through it, but whoa, was that intense. I mean, I think you
mm,
mentioned working with ayahuasca. So you probably know a little bit about purging.
mhm.
And this is even more intense, It's faster though. That's the benefit. Like ayahuasca, you can drink ayahuasca and you're like, oh God, I'm gonna purge. And then
Right.
it's just like, oh, and, you've got lots and lots and lots of it. But with 5-MeO, it's like, whoa, it's
Yeah.
faster that way. Um, so that's one bonus. It's more intense, but yeah, you get through it quicker.
Wow. Wow. Awesome. Yeah, I love the mix of like the psychological work, like recognizing the patterns and then also using these medicines and these tools to move the energy, to remove the energy, because I think that gets missed a lot in psychotherapy and things like that is like the actual blockages, the actual reactions in the body, like those don't get, I mean, that's where the real fear lives. That's where the real
Yeah,
terror, it's like a real like when that comes up, whether through like a psychedelic experience or you just feel into it, it's like life or death, you know? It's like really terror in that moment.
yeah. It's a very embodied process. It's a very
Yeah.
somatic process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. Um, so I guess in that field, I was wondering about like authentic living. Like what does that really mean to you? Is like this authentic way of living? How do we bring that into our relationships, into our more human life, our day-to-day um, romantic relationships, things like this? Like how does that look and show up?
Yeah. So first of all, we are all responsible for ourselves. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that, especially in sort of modern Western culture, we have these ideas of like, oh, you're my soulmate. And so you complete me. And,
Mm,
you know, that's just actually codependency, that we are all responsible for ourselves and that no one can complete us and no one can really make us happy in that sense. So it's up to us that, and that's going to be different for each person. So there's no formula for what that means, or how that is supposed to look. So it is about finding your authenticity and also then finding your boundaries because that's part of your authenticity. Like, no, I don't want that. But a lot of people get into relationships that reaffirm their egoic wounds and hangups and unconscious patterning. So as we become more conscious, this is where a lot of people change their relationships as they go through psychedelic work or psychedelic therapy. They find like, oh, this doesn't actually work for me.
mm,
So it's about finding what is authentic and meaningful for you. And then I like to encourage people to like, well, then pour your life into that. And also, as this is a process, that recognizing that if you are loving and supporting yourself, sometimes that means that maybe you're going to have to work a job for a while that's not really resonant for you, but you do need to eat, you do need housing, you do need these things. And so it's not just about, I'm going to drop everything and go discover myself, that it's important to support yourself along the way. And that when we are in loving, intimate relationships with another, that what we want ideally is I give my partner full permission to be herself or himself or themselves, however they want to identify. And I also have that for myself. And that we are here to mutually support each other. But like I wrote this little book of non-dual poetry, and one of the poems I write about how I did not give you your heart and I did not ask you for yours.
Mhm.
My heart belongs to me, just as yours belongs to you. My job is to love myself infinitely and unconditionally. And if you can do that for yourself, then we can find ourselves here together in love. So there's a radical sense of freedom and non-attachment there. And in the overall lifestyle, I mean, it's not about like a lot of people identify with, well, I eat organic food or I'm vegan or whatever. And that's always, for me, that's a personal choice. Like I like to say, it is a God eat God world out there. So, it's about finding what's authentic for you, that the ethical guidelines that we put on ourselves are not universal. So I want to be the best, most authentic human I can be for me, but it doesn't mean that you need to be like me or that I need to say that everybody else needs to be doing exactly what I'm doing.
Mhm.
But the more we can find within our lives that gives us a sense of energetic freedom and authenticity, and if we do those things, the more fulfilling our life will be. And sometimes that means being of service to others. Sometimes that means doing good deeds, but other times it might mean, like for me as a musician, I bracket out when I do music, but when I'm doing music, man, that is the one and only thing that I want to do. So I will sit here for a month working on an album, and I just love it so much, and it's
Mhm.
engaging my energy and creativity. And is it making the world a better place? I don't know, probably not, but man, I love it. I love it.
Right.
Um, and then like being able to teach, like I'm teaching a couple online courses right now, and I just absolutely love doing that. I love teaching, and I love doing integration calls with people. Um, and then yeah, I charge for my time, right? That's another big spiritual thing. Like, oh, well, if you're spiritual, you should do it
Right.
for free. No, we live in a monetary economy. You've got to support yourself. And that was actually a problem that I had where um, feeling like, because so many people over the years would reach out to me like, oh, I don't know who else to talk to about my 5-MeO experience or my big psychedelic experience. And I kind of put pressure on myself like, yeah, I know there's no one else you can talk to that has my perspective. So I made myself available for free. And
Right.
I found that actually that was really draining, that then I was experiencing like I'm spending like 5 hours a day answering people's emails and I've got other stuff to do. So now I've just set very clear boundaries. Like, you want to talk? Great. Let's set up a call. Here are my rates.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then sometimes I get people like, oh, well, I hope you would just like talk to me. It's like, sorry, but these are my boundaries. And so finding your
Yeah.
boundaries, not apologizing for them, and then living
Mhm.
by them.
Mhm.
And finding the things, even if it can't be your main work, finding things that do give you a sense of fulfillment and joy and exploration and freedom and hopefully creativity as well. That
Mhm.
I think that that's very, very important. Like if I were just to, like my dad is old. He's one of these university professors who is just like, he's hung on and he's hung on because he really likes doing chemistry, but he's never developed any interests outside of that. And so now he's at a point where his health is declining. He can't really go teach anymore, and he doesn't know what to do with himself because he's never cultivated that throughout his life of like, well, what do I really want? And see, this is a place where going back into like how the ego is programmed. When I was young and growing up, and playing music and doing art and theater. And he would always say, well, that's not going to get you anywhere. You've got to set all that stuff aside and just focus on your academics. Now that's a place where I could have like adopted that and really shut myself down. But I was, defiant. I was like, don't tell me what to do. So I chose to keep doing these things. And I'm so glad that I did, that I never set these things aside, that I've always kept this as a part of my life. But for a lot of people, they've received that from their parents or their society or whatever, and so they've shut it down. And, the educational system is not really supportive of creativity and creative expression overall. It's all focused on academics and test scores. So we
Yeah.
don't live in the ideal environment for that. But it it makes life richer and
Mm.
finding that. And I'm a big nature enthusiast and I like to promote that for anyone. I'm sorry for people who live in big cities and can't get out into nature, that I think it is really nourishing, and being
Hmm.
able to spend time in nature.
Mm.
I'm a big birder.
Hmm.
I'm a big bird photographer and nature
Mm.
photographer. And I love it. Like, I'm such a loner, but I'm like super happy if I'm just out in the middle of the forest and I've got my camera and there's birds going off. I'm just like, oh, this is the best. I'm so happy just to be out here by myself. And now I've
Mm.
got my son who's like totally enthusiastic about it, and so that's good too. And that's also, I'll
Yeah.
just add, with like raising children, is
Mm.
about supporting them to be themselves, not being what you think they should be or how
Mm.
they should be. It's about nurturing them to explore and be the energy that they are, and then
Mm.
also give them guidance, because they do need some reflection of like, yeah, don't hit your sister. Like, come on. Like, okay, let's
Right.
find a way to channel that energy. So it's not just like, oh, just let them do whatever they want, but it is about not shaming them, not punishing them to turn them into something, but to find ways to cultivate and help them grow. And then that's what you want to do in all your relationships. And you want to do that for yourself, that I want to help grow.
Mm.
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And that's one thing that you talk about that I find so inspiring and um so cool about your work is this like coming back to being a human and being real and authentic and just it's like we have this energetic blueprint from the universe, ourselves as God in this human form, and they're all different. And it's like finding that way that and all the answers are within, right? Our emotions tell us it's like this feels right, this doesn't, this.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so cool. And I do remember in Entheogenic Liberation, you mentioned a little bit towards the end, something that kind of it was really short passage, but it kind of caught my attention was around the romantic relationships and how you were saying something around like if the energy is not there, then we just decided to like if we don't feel it anymore, then we'll stop. We're not going to try to force something that isn't there or something like that. And I thought that was really cool as well. It's just like honoring that authentic feeling and not getting the
Yeah.
mind involved. We have to, we should these labels, these mean this and that, we have to do that, but really honoring your energetic blueprint.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's all tied in with being authentic. Again, that
Mhm.
authenticity, energy, truth, reality, love, these are all synonyms of finding ways to embody that and live that, free from the
And
conceptuality and the conceptual box that we might try and lock ourselves into.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Cool, Martin, thank you so much. I was gonna ask if just a final question, if there's anything, any kind of transmission or message or anything you can leave us with, like a final thought or anything you'd like to share.
Yeah. I would encourage people to love themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, like, really, really, really love yourself. And I think that's the most fundamental block for most people, is like really unconditionally loving yourself and accepting yourself and
Hmm.
giving yourself permission to be yourself. That the more you can do that, then the more you are being. And so that's what I would want. That's what I've
Hmm.
tried to do for myself. That's what I try and model for others. And it doesn't mean being what other people think you should be, but just like being who you are and finding who you are. And if you don't know who you are, well, you have a beautiful process of discovery awaiting you. And be brave with it. Be bold.
Yeah.
Yeah. And find that
Totally.
love.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, just personally, I have maybe 85 subscribers, maybe 87 now as of filming. And you came on, agreed to do the podcast with me and do this interview. And I think to me that just shows how much you really believe in this work and how much, really joy and love you're putting into this and how much, satisfaction it brings. And again, just that like that authentic sharing because this is who you are and this is what you love. And it's just the embodied example of what you're writing and talking about. So yeah, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you was just because of that. It's hard to find that level of embodiment. Um, so yeah, I guess just to end off, is there anything that you'd like to share in terms of like resources, books, your podcast? And I do highly recommend everybody check out Martin Ball. And he's really got an amazing way of talking about reality and a very strong transmission in these fields.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so my main hub website is just martinball.net, and you can find links to everything else there pretty much. And there's a lot there, so it's kind of information dense. Um, For people who want to have a conversation, I have my website, nondualentheogenicintegration.com, and I offer 30, 60, or 90-minute video calls. And it doesn't have to be for integration. It could be for preparation or just philosophical chit chat or non-dual contemplation, whatever. Mostly people come to me with like, wow, I had this experience and I need somebody to talk to. And I'm always happy to do that. Um, my podcast is the Entheogenic Evolution. I've been doing it for 17 years now. A new episode comes out every week. It's only audio. And I also release selections from my audiobooks on there. You can find my books on Amazon, Audible, the Apple Bookstore. They're all in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. My music you can find on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon. Just I'm Unfortunately, there's another Martin Ball, and sometimes our musics are combined together, but his music is like Christian praise and gospel. And so I always like to say, I'm not Martin come to the throne Ball. That's the other Martin Ball.
The ultimate
Um,
irony, huh?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's just, whoa, that's a good one. And then for people who are really interested in learning more, I'm currently teaching with Mindscape Psychedelic Institute, and I have a class that I'm teaching just on integrating 5-MeO DMT experiences and training people to help other people integrate. So it's a specialist training course. We're halfway through. I'm going to be offering that again a little bit later this year. And then we also have a course on facilitating 5-MeO DMT, which is a longer, like 5-month long course. And I'm co-teaching that with some other teachers. So for people who want to learn more, and the classes are held on Zoom, that they can always check that out as well. And so, yeah, all the links are at martinball.net, but it's all spread out. And then I have another webpage just for my art, which is fractalimagination.com. And man, anything else? I think that about covers it for now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Martin. Really appreciate your time. Have a great evening over there and hope to speak soon.
All right. Thanks, Timur. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.